or the rightist, depending on. It all depends on where you're standing, right? Friends, I want to introduce Dr. Hunter Farrell, who is, whom evidently I did not meet in Africa. We were trying to figure, that was a trip where my head was spinning in many different directions. But Hunter, I think I have met you at mission stuff at the Presbytery. Hunter has seen mission all over the world as the Director of World Missions for our denomination, the PCUSA. And I am just so grateful. Someone said to Hunter, come to Pittsburgh and train up a new generation of pastors who are trying to figure if the old models of mission aren't really working anymore. So what are the new models of mission, and what is God calling us to do when we hear the pleas of our neighborhood and our city, and as we try to live into being a Matthew 25 congregation? So what do we do? And that's a place I think congregations often find themselves like, we're doing the things, but we want to be more engaged. We want to know our neighbor, not just feed them on occasions. And I've heard that from a lot of people. So I hope that Hunter, I trust that Hunter will give us some tools to kind of think that through. And I know we have folks from Mission Committee here. We're taping this. I think that this will be a really valuable conversation. So with that, I introduce Dr. Hunter Farrell.
Now, is that? Oh, right. He has a good voice. That's not that good. Okay. Well, good. Good morning. It's good to be with you all. I was so moved and inspired by worship with you this morning. I really appreciated the chance to worship with you. And it's not, I thought the service was beautifully put together and really inspired me, particularly around the theme of generosity. So I really appreciated that. You all, how many of you were here last week when my colleague at Pittsburgh Seminary, Bala Kellup, spoke? Okay, so a good number of you. Okay, good. Can we start out then with a test question? I think it has frozen a bit. There you go. Perfect, thanks. I'm just going to set this down then, if that's all right. Yeah. Was there an idea that you heard? Bala talked about kind of the twin challenges that we're facing. That we talked to 1,400 different congregational mission leaders, people like deacons, heads of deacon boards, mission committee people, a youth person who just wants to help get the youth into the neighborhood, to connect them with what's going on in maybe a homeless shelter in your community, or a soup kitchen, or some kind of a local mission work. Perhaps a Presbyterian women leader who wants to connect the church more deeply with what God's doing in the community. What those people said, the 1,400 Catholic, evangelical, and mainline Protestant, we talked to a wide group of U.S. mission leaders, folks in local congregations who are engaging their congregations in mission. We talked to them and said, what are the challenges you're facing? They said a lot of things, but what it boiled down to was two challenges. One was what we call selfie mission. Different from what our grandparents understood to be mission, right? Service to the world, sacrificial service to the world. We see mission nowadays more as personal transformation, right? Every day I'm becoming a better person. Well, our grandparents would not like that, because that's not what they understood to be God's mission, right? But a lot of our mission leaders said that's what we're facing. It's not just the younger generations, but the older generations too. They see mission as a way to revitalize the church and bring in more young people, and maybe it'll help our church survive if we do mission better. So that was one of the challenges, selfie mission. The other was this whole area of what we call kind of the colonial assumptions of mission. One of the challenges of mission is it was the modern era of mission was born right at the same time that the colonial movement started. and one kind of bonded with the other, and it's hard to separate them out sometimes, even to the present day. And we see a lot of colonial assumptions, a lot of assumptions about race and class that are sort of baked into our understandings of mission. And I think Bala walked you all through some of the discoveries we had as we talked to mission leaders around the country. Was there an idea that you heard last week that intrigued you, made you want to know more, something that kind of surprised you or encouraged you, challenged you or encouraged you? Something you recall from last week? Susan?
I think one of the things that made an impression on many of us came towards the end of Bala's conversation, where he showed the photos that kind of represented, even how we photograph people and look at people. That was very telling. And I was teasing Steve afterwards because we had that generosity video we saw earlier. I was saying, I know we didn't have pictures in there where we're like looking down on somebody, or or making ourselves look like kind of the white saviors, that kind of thing. And it was just it was intriguing to me that even with our best intentions, our photographs, how we it betrays kind of how that stuff is in us.
Yeah, and these are long traditions, and it's the scripts. I really love that imagery you were using in the sermon. These are the scripts that we've all inherited. It's almost like we've got a backpack with these scripts just stuffed in them. And I hear my grandmother's voice. God bless her. Yeah, I hear my grandmother's voice in a lot of the things I think about mission, because she was the voice in my family system that said, got to be concerned about your neighbor. Think about the people who don't have as much as you do. Constant, that value in me comes from my grandmother and probably her mother before her, etc. So these scripts are strong ones, and sometimes seeing how we view the folks around us. Are they the objects of our mission, or are they agents of mission with God and with us? It changes the dynamic, right? It makes for a round table rather than for a help desk, where they're coming to us and we're given across the table maybe a tray or something that they need, or can we help you, that kind of a thing. That puts us in a safe position behind the service counter or behind the desk. And frankly, if you've been in a situation sitting face to face with someone who you don't have a whole lot in common with, there's a whole lot of awkwardness in that space. And I don't seek that out normally. And yet that's precisely the space where God works so powerfully in that person's life and mine. When that person senses, Hunter doesn't have a clue as to what to say to me, and they open and they maybe help me to take the first step to bridge that gap, and then they help bridge that gap, and suddenly we're in a deeper conversation than we could have been otherwise. Okay, let's go to the next, Steve. Is it working now? Yes. So it's just me. This is the very technological finger, I want you to know. Great. Okay. Now see? Is that, oh, there it is. Okay. I need more faith in my finger, that's it. Okay, so these are the two, that selfie mission, and no, not disrespecting the young woman on a short-term mission trip to Africa, but somehow that's how we kind of posit ourselves before a world of need. There we are. God's hands and feet. How many times have we heard that in our own churches, right? In a sense, we're not God's hands and feet. I got bad news for you, right? We're not really God's hands and feet. We join God's mission. God invites us into God's mission. And we step into that mission with all that we have, as we heard in the sermon today, time, talents, all. But the challenge for us is sometimes we posit it like it's our mission, like this is Hunter Farrell's mission, like Hunter Farrell were the God's gift to the world. And in fact, that's not the case at all, as our grandparents knew. But somehow in this me-first culture that is developing in this country, it's sort of twisting, I would say, our understanding of mission. The other piece, again, that colonial mission, for the best of intentions, good-hearted folks in churches in this country gave to mission, and in Europe likewise gave to mission, and many people gave their lives in mission, got on these kinds of boats and went across the ocean for 40 years in India or China or Brazil or places across the globe. Praise God, God bless them. And I'm part of that missionary movement with the Presbyterian Church, and I'm thankful for that. And there's another side of it, that also that sort of the winds that were pushing that were the winds of colonialism, which was wholesale extraction, the theft of billions of dollars of silver and gold and emeralds and all kinds of resources to power the European economies. This is beginning with the Portuguese and probably the 15th century up to really 1960, officially ends the colonial era. But some would argue it's still going on in a variety of ways. And I worked in Congo for 5 years and Peru for 10. And the colonial era continues in a different way, in different forms, right? And so we need to just to be aware of that. Well, so my question is, are we mission experience consumers, or are we sent ones, right? People sent by God in the name of Jesus Christ, in the power of the Spirit, to be part of what God is doing in the world and transform the world and find ourselves transformed as well. Oftentimes, we have our handheld devices, we are watching the videos, we're watching the TV, and we're shaped in patterns of consumerism to believe that we can purchase a mission experience, we can go on a trip, we can watch the video and be part of what God is doing in the world. Well, what I'd like to do is think in terms of 5 superpowers that each of you has. And this is as you lead, whether it's a PW group or supporting the youth group in this church, what the kids are doing. How beautiful. You had 140 kids here yesterday. That's amazing. That's really, really cool. And creates a space where you can connect with folks who don't normally come this way, right? What a wonderful initiative that was of the church. So 5 superpowers that you all have as leaders of of the ways that your church is participating in God's mission. One thing that I think is really important, we'll all get onto the boat, the colonial boat, a little too easily, because those scripts that we carry in our backpack, we're created back in that era, and we've inherited those faithfully. The church is good at inheriting and copying word for word exactly what we received and passing it on. It's a time-tested tradition. Paul speaks of it in 1 Corinthians. I'm not dissing it at all, but we also have to review those scripts and ask ourselves, is that the way that I can be faithful today into the ministry of Jesus Christ? My grandmother was one of the best Christians in my life. And in the years when my nuclear family was kind of imploding, and there was divorce and there was all kinds of stuff going on, it was my grandmother who was that harbor in a stormy sea. Her house was the place where I went to be at peace. And at the same time, I grew up in Dallas, Texas. I don't usually say that to a group of Pittsburghers. But I grew up in Dallas, Texas. And our society, I'm not speaking to Pittsburgh now, I don't know about y'all, but we were raised with particular understandings of the ways that blacks and whites were to live in the same society. And there were pretty strict lines. And I remember my grandmother warning me about those people out there. And as I sat there, having learned all I'd learned from the Bible in our Presbyterian Church Sunday school, I thought, this is not biblical what I'm hearing. I was hearing a lot of good Texas culture, but it wasn't particularly biblical. And so that at an early age, this is like 10, I realized we have to examine all of those cultural scripts that we're receiving in the light of Scripture, right? And that becomes really important. So God bless my grandmother. She provided so much Christian teaching in my life, and yet it was imperfect. And I have to go back and look at ways that I can disrupt those colonial assumptions in the ways that we engage in mission. Well, what is that? As we think about some of those colonial assumptions, the colonial era said, we Europeans, that is, we lighter-skinned folks, we know what's best for the rest of the world. So it's our benevolence that will help these people. These people are poor, they need our technology, they need our education. We need to make them more like us. And so there's stories in the Congolese church of how to be a Christian, you really needed to put on a tie. If you were a man, you needed to put on a tie. Well, I don't know if you've ever worn a tie in Congolese heat, but it is not what climatically appropriate, right? But it was just it's just a picture in my mind that we made some assumptions about the ways that people need to be like us in order to become followers of Jesus. And from the book of Galatians on, Paul said, no, that's not right. God makes God's self clear and relevant and present in every culture in the world, speaks every language in the world. They don't have to become like us to then follow Jesus Christ. So some of those unspoken colonial assumptions in this image I just love, because there's a power in this image. What do you see when you see this image? Maybe you looked at it last week with Bala. What do you see?
I see a connection between certainly the two figures on physical connection.
Yeah, physical connection and more. What do you think? What do you think the little girl is thinking, if you were to take a guess?
Well, we just ate a piece of candy. I'm good.
Yeah, okay. Maybe so. Maybe so. I asked that question to a group, and one woman said she's imagining for the first time in her life that she might be able to be a doctor. Right? Just the power of that moment. Who knows what's going on in the picture. But you can see on the part of mom, there's a sense of trust. She's pretty relaxed, right? She's just at peace. She likes what's going on here, and she's letting it happen, right? The girl looks enchanted, excited, happy. And I think the doctor as well. He seems to be pretty excited about the connection between them. That's beautiful. Just an image like this, though, it disrupts the colonial narrative, because we have so many pictures where there's a guy like me, right? A good white savior. And no, I'm not dissing the white saviors. I'm one of them, right? All of us are in many ways, right? I'm laughing at that word, savior. But we see it, we posit ourselves, we put ourselves in the picture as helping. You notice in that picture that we don't really see the woman's face. We don't know her story, we don't know anything about her. We just imagine need, right? From skin color to she's a little less in focus, she looks a little older, he's got a stethoscope, he's helping her in some way. Okay. I want us to think about some strategies. I'm really impressed with the work of a Methodist mission pastor in Shreveport, Louisiana, Ashley Goad. Ashley is really sensitive to a great teacher. Any teachers in the room? Okay, so good, some teachers. So teachers know you got to start where the students are, right? You start with what they know to take the next step into what they don't know. Well, Ashley Goad does this. She knows that her Methodists in Shreveport, Louisiana are rule followers. You know any church people who are rule followers? There are a lot of us, right? We're good rule followers. Well, she starts that and she said, okay, let's make a rule that will only engage in mission that focuses on building our relationships with our partners locally and globally. And everybody said, that sounds like a good rule. So they put it in, every allocation, every trip, every activity, they were going to make sure that they leaned into relationship rather than transaction. They felt that their mission work had gotten a little transactional. So they did that, and it was really, really powerful. Well, give Methodists or Presbyterians or Catholics a rule, and every allocation and they did, but it transformed over time the ways that they understood mission, because they were looking for where is God building a relationship with someone. Rather than sending a check, what if we went ourselves? What if we entered in that awkward space? And I call that the crossing over space. That's a tough one. I don't know this space. I don't know these people. They might speak in a way that I don't understand. What if they want to shake hands in a way that's not the way that I shake hands, right? All that stuff. That's what missionaries have dealt with since the beginning. But Ashley was really good at framing the story around relationship. Right? Because oftentimes, particularly in the last 20 years, that story of mission has become more allocations. How do we send money? How do we get people to give more money so we can send more money? And that becomes the work of mission. And so mission committees in many congregations, Catholic, evangelical, and mainline Protestant, folks said it's a joyless space because we have fewer and fewer resources, greater and greater need, and we're just trying to send checks to, put our finger in the dike, said one of the mission leaders. Ashley Goad was willing to reframe the story, frame that story in a new way, and I think that's really important. The man in the middle is a Presbyterian minister. He was ministering when I met him in Iowa. I was a graduate of Pittsburgh Seminary, went to Iowa for several years, had two yoked churches in the plains of just to the east of Des Moines, and is now at the Westmont Presbyterian Church in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. Pastor Ben T. And Ben found that if you can help people understand that the folks that we're serving aren't the objects of God's mission, but rather they're agents in mission, they're fellow missionaries with us, who in that circle are already helping those kids that we want to support. Right? You see kids in need, and the mission industries, whether child sponsorship or orphanages or meal packaging programs, all of these mission industries are billion-dollar industries. U.S. Christians each year give more than $3 billion to child $3.8 million a year go to child sponsorships. Wow. More than $3.5 billion goes to short-term mission trips each year. More than $3 billion goes to the meal packaging programs that have become so big on college campuses and mission conferences and local congregations. Are there ways, though, that we can move beyond what those mission industries proclaim, which is need and pity? They try to inspire pity. We see images of people who have desperate need, and we think, oh, I should do something. And so we give out of a sense of desperation or pity, or we feel bad, we feel a little guilty that we have something, we have a meal and they don't. And Ben tried to reframe it and say, what if we imagined ourselves as working together in God's mission? There's already a whole circle around that child that we might want to sponsor. There's a circle of care around that child. That child may already have parents, probably does, a nuclear family, an extended family, a community, all kinds of folks who are there willing to help. Finally, you all know from Pittsburgh Presbytery lore, this part of this neck of the woods of God's world, the work that Pittsburgh Presbytery has done in its partnership with the Church of Central Africa Presbyterian in Malawi, right? Have you all been part of that? Has that been a piece of...
I went in 95.
Okay, great. Okay, anybody else traveled to Malawi before? Have you all received Malawians? Have you met some Malawians through that exchange? Great. What an amazing thing. It is so much more mutual, right? It's a sharing of resources in ways that a lot of our presbytery partnerships just don't touch. But it happened because Bill and Nancy Paul and Margaret and Silas Chosana, from the very start, this partnership begins because they like each other a lot. They're just good friends. And so when Bill and Paul traveled to Malawi, the Chosanas said, well, stay with us. And they said, oh, no, we wouldn't put you out. We'll stay in a hotel. And the Chosanas said, no, you'll stay with us. You're our guests. We want to be with you. We want to sit around and have tea, and we want to eat together. And so they did that, and it changed the texture of the relationship. And to this day, as I worked, as Susan said, I worked in the national offices of the Presbyterian Church as the director of Presbyterian World Mission. And as I look across the different presbytery partnerships, this Pittsburgh Malawi partnership is a very strong one, very mutual one, because of this work, that it starts out of a relationship. And so I'm really grateful for that. So one way that we can sort of, I would say, disrupt those colonial assumptions is to do the things that these leaders did. They reframed the story. They understood the folks out there not as the objects of mission, but fellow travelers with us. No one does this perfectly. Let's do it together. Each of us can bring different skills and resources and strengths to this effort. And the Chosanas and the Pauls, who understood it primarily as relationship, and everything grew out of that. Well, those are great ways to disrupt that colonial binary or that colonial assumption that makes us think that, oh, we have everything and they have nothing. We're here to help them and they're here to receive from us. Because what does that evoke in them? Passivity, dependency. Well, what are you going to give us this year, right? It can be, I had talked with an elder in a Presbyterian church in southern Illinois, and he said, we go every year to this community in Mexico and we give out toothbrushes. He said, I'm convinced that these folks have learned to brush their teeth by now. He said, we've got to do something better. It's usually an elder on your session. You know, the person who's looking at the bottom line says, this is not a sustainable solution. What, can we think about a longer-term solution? So I think it's really helpful for us to look beyond that simplistic colonial binary, right, that they have nothing and we have everything, and we're here to be God's hands and feet. I want to share a second superpower, and I'm going to go a little more quickly now. What happens if you asked a question? As you sit together on your mission committee, as you sit together in Presbyterian women, or as you think a group of adults, how can we get our young people engaged in what God's doing, even in this community? What are some ways we can do that? You can slow down our natural tendency to say, oh, let's do a vacation Bible school and we'll bring in this many kids and we'll plan this and you do the food and you do the instruction and you do the music. And, you know, we're set. Presbyterians, we're good planners, right? We can plan the heck out of a lot of stuff. What if we just slowed it down and began to ask some, what I'd call some deeper questions? So I was visiting a child sponsorship program just north of the city of Lima, Peru. And I asked a group of mothers, what do you like about the program? These are mothers of these kids who were sponsored, and they said, oh, it provides a hot meal each day. It gives them help with their homework. We love the program. Then there was a pause. I thought, there's something else in the room. What's going on here? And I said, is there anything you don't like about it? Awkward pause. And then I think one of the women was sizing me up. She was like, maybe it's probably his brother that's in charge, is sponsoring my kid. I better be real careful. And so she pauses, and then she took a dare, and she said, would you want a foreign adult writing regularly to your 7-year-old daughter? Well, I had a 10-year-old daughter at the time. And I said, pardon my French, I said, heck no. I said, heck no, are you crazy? Over my dead body. No foreign adult is going to write regularly to my child. Well, what had happened was by child sponsorship, by me giving $18 or $20 or $28 a month, I think that I have a special place in that child's life, that I can give that child advice over some of the most sensitive issues or deepest concerns of that child. I can help that child imagine the child in the future. No, that's not my place. But because I have money in my pocket and goodwill in my heart, I think that gives me the power to influence that child's life. What that mother's question helped me to see was, wow, I'm seeing that child as my object of mission. And what I need to understand is there's a whole circle of care around that child that I need to become more aware of, right? Okay, what's another question we could ask? How would it feel if someone did this intervention to me? Before we organize that beautiful vacation Bible school, and I'm not dissing vacation Bible schools, love them, but if we organize that for their kids and are not in conversation with mom and dad of those kids, we're teaching them what in our church about God and society and the world? We need to be real careful, right? So what are ways that we can walk with those moms and dads who are deeply concerned about their kids and what their kids are doing during the summer? Maybe we can work together and create a better vacation Bible school because we're doing it together. So asking that golden rule question, how would this feel if someone did it to me, is such a great question to ask. What might be some of the unintended consequences of this project that we're thinking about doing? What a great question to ask. You may find quickly that you don't have the right people at the table. We need to go out a little further and ask some other folks in the community. What do you imagine? Here's what we're thinking of doing. What do you think could go good with that? And what do you think could go not so good with that? Asking folks that question can really open up some important conversations as we're planning to do different kinds of mission work in our community. And that's the question. It often says, who else needs to be at the table for us to be able to do this better? Okay. One of the challenges to us in this day and era is that mission has become the sexiest thing in the church. There is nothing more attractive in what the church does than mission. Because with just one image of a child in need, you can generate a revenue source, right? Just a flow of money. And that changes everything in human relationships. You all know money can have you ever had money turn a relationship sour? Many of us have experienced that. Maybe a family member, maybe a friend, maybe someone we knew in our circle. But one of the challenges is the mission industries today try to frame mission with a very small frame. It's just this child. Your gift can make a world of difference in this child's life. Maybe, and that's great. But I would argue there's a bigger story here. What if we opened up the frame to see that child in the circle of care that God has already placed around that child? This is God's work from first to last. God is deeply concerned about this child, much more than I am. I barely know this child's story or name. Maybe I don't even know their name or story. But if we open up the frame, we see that there's mom, there's other moms, there's a dad, there's children, there's health workers from the town. There's a whole circle of care that God has placed around that child. Are there ways that we can strengthen mom and dad and the circle of care in ways that are much more sustainable? Sometimes they just need help getting through a tough 3 months. Well, if we sign up to be their sponsor until they're 18, maybe we're throwing things off in that local community, right? Okay, so by enlarging that circle, it helps us move to merely work on the symptoms of poverty. That child needs a hot meal every day and needs help with homework eventually when they go into elementary school, etc. It helps us move from a place of pity to a place of justice. How can we provide for that child in ways that reflect God's good intentions for the world? A place of justice and peace. Okay, well those are three of the ideas that I wanted to share. I wanted to say one way that a lot of congregations are finding to bring new people into their mission work, whether it's a mission committee or if it's a group of folks, a group like deacons who are doing mission every week of the year, but to use mission experiences to cultivate new mission leaders, to understand folks in Presbyterian women or the youth group, even young people, right, as potential mission leaders, right? And what are ways that we can help cultivate them as leaders? You all know that short-term mission has gotten a bad rap in recent years. People tend to be, particularly the missiologists, the people who study mission, in like seminaries and places. They're really like me. I've had a conversion experience with short-term mission. A lot of the missiologists tend to be very critical, and you only heard critical stories about mission trips because it's such a waste of money. I mean, you know the narrative. It's an inefficient use of resources. It's ineffective at creating sustainable change, and it reinforces this sense that we go and we take everything and we're everything to these people, right? It creates an illusion. People saw that short-term mission practitioners, people who engaged in a short-term mission trip, didn't give more over time like they thought. Everyone, for years, the narrative has been, you go on a mission trip and you give more. In fact, that's not the case. In fact, people don't pray more or give more, and the studies have shown that it tends to reinforce our ethnocentricity, our sense that our ways are best. And those poor people, oh, I'm glad I'm not there. I came home and I took my hot shower and I'm done with it, right? That's sometimes the mentality that we come back with. And yet, there's something in short-term mission. There's something, and every time I speak in a group, I say, has anyone's life been changed by a short-term mission experience? And hands go up. Yeah, boom. Because there's something in that experience. And so what Bala and I did as we were putting our book together is we began to look at that more closely. What is it about short-term mission experiences that allow people to have a fundamental change, a sense of transformation in their own lives and in the lives of the people that they work with? My mom's life was changed forever because of a short-term mission experience. Her church. She was working, trying to make ends meet, and her church offered her a place in a group that was going to Botswana. My mom couldn't afford the trip. They helped her to go. She traveled on that trip, and her life was forever changed because she met someone who was struggling with an issue that she was struggling with. And she saw how he was managing his life, and it inspired her that God could make a change in her life, and it changed her forever. So I'm deeply grateful. You're not going to get me throwing stones at short-term mission trips because there's something in them. We just see it, an ability of a short-term mission experience to gather people together in some powerful ways. So I want to ask, I'm going to see, Steve, where I'm going to test our ability now. I've got a video hooked up with this, and I think if you could put the cursor in the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see it, if you can just click on it. This is a scene from a movie, Same Kind of Different as Me, that maybe some of you have seen. Powerful movie, and it's a great help for us to think about mission, doing mission in a new way. It's a story of a crisis in a couple. There we go. It's that one with the speaker on it, and I got the video embedded in that, yeah. If you can, I don't know if you can get the cursor over to, do you have a cursor that you can move across the screen? Say again? Where should the cursor go? If at the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see a little arrow that you can click as if you're starting a video. But if not, I can.
Send us the video. We can,
Yeah.
we'll put it on our site.
Okay, that's great.
We know the story because we read the book in Sunday school. So
Oh, beautiful. Well, you know the story then. Many of you know the story of a couple, and there's a crisis in their marriage, and the wife says to the husband, if we're going to stay together, you have to get out of yourself. You have to move beyond. You're a prisoner of your own selfishness. You got to get beyond that. And so you need to do some time, do some volunteer work in a soup kitchen that was on the other side of town. So the most unlikely of experiences and most likely of friendships begins with a man who is receiving. He goes into this shelter to receive a meal, and the two men meet, and it starts a friendship that transforms both of their lives. The reason I lift that up, the man makes all the mistakes in mission you could possibly make. In his first encounter with the man, he walks up, the man's seated at a table all by himself and looking down. It looks like there's a lot going on in this man's mind. So the couple, he's an art dealer. The art dealer steps forward, puts the tray of lasagna and just shoves it in the guy's face and says, would you do my wife a favor? She's a little concerned about you. Just between us guys, would you have something to eat, right? Well, that's probably not, on a number of different levels, that's an odd way to get into this kind of thing, right? And so I'll play the video and say, what do you see wrong in what the guy does? And there's a long list. We can tear it apart. And yet, the guy got up and walked across the room and engaged with someone who was very, very different from him. And so I just want to hold on to that space. We call that the space of crossing over. When you're in these pews, this feels comfortable. You got to admit, right? Whether it's a hard seat or not, it's a comfortable place to be because we all know what we're supposed to do. Students in a classroom know exactly what they're supposed to do, right? They know when to drop their gaze so they don't connect with the teacher so the teacher doesn't call on them, right? They know. It's all programmed. We know this. We're working according to the scripts, right? But in a space of crossing over, we don't have a script. We have no idea what we're going to say, what the person will say to us. There's awkwardness in the room. There's a sense of, I don't know what's happening next. And it may be because of a language difference. It may be because of an economic difference, a racial difference, a cultural difference, for a variety of reasons. But I think what God honors among us is folks who have the faith and the guts to step into that space, to engage in that work of crossing over, to be able to greet someone and connect with someone different from you, because you want to show them love and receive love from them. That is the space of crossing over. And what we've found consistently is people, Presbyterians, Catholics, Baptists, evangelicals, folks who are willing to step in that space on a short-term mission trip, on a Saturday afternoon visit to the homeless shelter, whatever that space is in the wide circle that this church is engaged in the local community and global community, to the extent that you're able to step into that space, that's the space of personal transformation. So I would encourage you with young people, with new members classes, with all kinds of folks, those are the folks that you want to walk with into those spaces of crossing over, because that makes a world of difference in their life, and they'll be forever changed because of that. You were willing to walk with them, and they saw your blood pressure go up as you stepped into that space. They knew that you weren't comfortable, and yet you did it anyway. And you provide right there a model for them, showing them that I don't know where we're going, but I know that we're walking with God in Christ. And therefore, let's walk together. That's a model. We call that companionship, a mission of companionship. And we think that that's really important in the ways that we can work. So here's a question I have to you. There's the question. You didn't see the video, so I won't give you a test on it. What's a superpower that you have? I talked about disrupting the colonial narrative. We talked about reframing the ways that we think about mission. We talked about asking a question, right, to slow down our reflection on mission so we can go a little deeper. These are all what we call superpowers, right? The things that you have an ability to do. Can you think of a superpower that you might use that would be particularly helpful for your congregation? The ways that you all are engaged in mission in this community here in the greater Pittsburgh area and more broadly. What's something that you might do to help your church engage more deeply in mission? What would that look like? What's a way that you're engaged in mission now?
What's the role? I mean, I'm in a Bible study every Wednesday, and we devote part of that time to prayer.
Mm-hmm.
So what role does prayer play in helping people bridge that gap or go in that space, or like lay the groundwork maybe for something to happen later?
Not only does it lay the groundwork, but I would argue that prayer is in itself a space of crossing over. When we pray together, we don't know. I don't know what people are going to say. I don't know where the Spirit's going to lead us. It's a great laboratory. It's a little space that we create among us to practice, to get on our training wheels, to try this. How do we walk in a space where we don't know where the Spirit's going to lead us? I think prayer it needs to be the first step as we engage in mission, before we start our planning or our resource allocation meetings or whatever the traditions are in your congregation, to be able to stop and reflect. You're reframing mission by saying, this isn't our project. This is something so much bigger. And we want to be faithfully a part of what God is doing, so we need to listen to God. So prayer from first to last. I don't think we can pray too much in the process of engaging in God's mission. Yeah, no, thanks for that. And I love that, thinking of prayer as a superpower that we have to be able to engage faithfully in God's mission. What's another way that you can engage in mission and what God's doing here in this community? I'll stand over here.
I think one of the superpowers that I try to have or to use is, for example, we had trunk or treat last night.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a struggle to get enough volunteers. People are busy. But what I think always is helpful, it's kind of like to bring a report back front, like, being able to tell a story of here's the stories I heard, here are the people I met, here's where I felt awkward and totally out of place.
Mm-hmm.
I think that companionship happens when you can kind of say, this is really hard and it wasn't really what I wanted to do. And man, I got there and it was like totally awesome and God showed up. And I can't wait to do that again. I think that encourages encourages then people to say, well, if she's willing to feel stupid or feel awkward or feel whatever,
Right.
I'll go and do that with her. We can be stupid and awkward together. But I think that is telling stories, that reframing the story of and I think that's something church leaders and pastors and people who are kind of doing this every day can come and just tell stories. Not saying just the bad part where that you saw need, but let me tell you this great person I met, and this incredible, kind of conversation we had, and what kind of work they're doing. The other thing I learned in doing a short-term mission when I went to South Sudan, which is a country that was then and now just like totally coming apart at the seams, and there was absolutely nothing I could do for the people that we met. What I could do was be present and listen to stories and to continually remind them, you aren't alone. We're praying for you. We're doing these things. And also to understand the systems that created the situation to begin with, which I think we sometimes are afraid to go upstream and say, so why is this happening? Because that's what our partners in South Sudan told us is, use your white power, white American power, because that is what's going to get upstream to make this better. So, but I wouldn't know that unless I was there and showed up and just listened. Because there's, it's huge. And in many places in the world, it's like, what can I do? Sometimes you just have to ask the question, what can I do? How can I pray for you? What resources do I have in my privileged position that can kind of get us through? So.
Beautiful. Yeah. Some good superpowers.
What I remember from going to Malawi, I went in 1995, so it's been a long time. But what I always remembered was that our mission was not to do projects. It was to meet people and know where they are and how we could help them, but pray with them and continue praying for them when we came home. And that's what I felt about that mission.
Beautiful, beautiful. And praise God, this set of relationships around Pittsburgh Presbytery's relationship with the Malawian Church.
It's really big. I mean, there's hundreds of people that have gone, and they still have that connection. I mean, I had that connection to mission.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what mission we're in, but I still have that connection.
And I don't know what the last count is, but there was an article written about the Malawi-Pittsburgh partnership, and more than 1,000 people had traveled in both directions, and about as many Malawians had come here as Pittsburghers had traveled to Malawi. That's remarkable. We don't see many mission.
The other thing I learned was there were so many people from the Presbytery that I never knew. They lived in Monroeville, they lived here, the crossing bridges thing. And it doesn't matter where I go to a Presbytery function, I always see people that were connected to the Malawi mission, and it connects us.
And as far as kind of the texture of connection, if you're in a crossover space, if you realize, okay, all of us, any one of us could fall flat on our face right about now, right? Socially speaking, or we don't know what's going on. There's a bonding. I mean, it happens when I take a trip with someone, right? If you ever travel with someone, there's a sense of we're on the road together. We don't know where the road's going to take us exactly. There may be a flat tire. There may be some, something may happen. There's a deeper sense of what the sociologists call social capital, right? The mortar between two bricks. We're connected tighter. In these spaces, when we engage around issues of there's an element of risk. We're going to maybe we'll get sick. Maybe we'll get lost. Maybe we won't know what someone's saying, right? Or even here at the homeless shelter, right? I may not know what's going on in the room. Is this dangerous? What's going on? I'm not really sure. Engaging in risk together is one of the factors that deepens that bond. And so you go to a Presbytery meeting 5 years later, and you're, hey, you're grabbing people like, how do you, yeah, she's from Monroeville, how do you know each other? You know, it's like, oh, we were in X place together, you know, that we did this homeless shelter together, or we were in
We were
Sudan.
in an airplane for 13 hours.
There you go. That'll do it.
That'll do it every
That'll do
time.
it. Beautiful. Another superpower that you have, another way that you have to help your congregation to engage more deeply. Do you all engage in mission with younger folks? Some of the kids. Do you all have a young people's group, a children's group in the church? Are there ways that you think about them engaging in mission? What's the age group? How old do they get?
Well, interestingly enough, our confirmation class, which is meeting right now, they were
Yeah.
here last week for
Right,
Father's
right.
Day. They're using a curriculum from the denomination that is centered on mission,
Yeah, yeah,
which I think is genius.
Yeah.
Because these kids, they don't want to just hear about their faith or learn about their faith. They're like, they want to do their faith. So I think that is, we have like a whole generation of kids up there who are probably going to push, you know, once they become members, they're going to be leading us,
Right.
I think, in a lot of ways. Because they're incredibly thoughtful, and they don't just want to sit back. They want to do the thing. So, I mean, and I think that you have had a history of young people
But I
involved in
think-
mission.
I mean, one of the things you guys have talked about, sort of discussing the mission trip after it occurs, to both understand what it meant for yourself, or what impression you left with the other party, the counterparty. And I think there's an opportunity to just, to over time get better at this. But that also involves doing box checking missions and saying to yourself, what did this buy you? Not to condemn it because it's good work, but also because it's not a digital event. It's not either we do missions right or we don't do missions right. It is how you move people to be more open to what you're talking about, which after doing a bunch of mission trips makes a lot of sense to me. You know, I used to call it drive-by missions. You know, it's like, throw money at them and fix their toilet and get the hell out of Dodge.
yeah, yeah.
But I think there's really an opportunity here to move things over time and make them more sustainable. Because if we assume that only we know how to run meaningful missions, in a way it's like colonialization. And the difference is that the young people and the people on mission need to learn and feel this themselves, to improve the quality of what we do, to convert. The other challenge we have, and I think we can get better at it, is converting people who are on the fence. Who say, I want to be a mission, except I
Right.
always have something that's more important. And I think if we can move this, that that, you know, I mean, we've been on mission trips together, and we know two things. We get more out of them than the people we're helping. And the kids, partially because our mission trips, the kids run the worship service. They come out of it with more than they ever thought they would. And I think they're changed. And so I don't want to give up any opportunity to do mission work, but I want to engage in a conversation about what did all this mean to everybody involved,
Right.
and what is the sustainable element of this? Because part of the colonial mission model, which works for American and European NGOs too, is you come do something for somebody, leave, 6 months later, you might as well not even have been there.
Right. And next week, another group comes and does the same thing.
Other people do it.
Yeah,
And, you know, in the NGOs, they'll drive around in their Range Rovers because this is great. And wearing their pith helmets and stuff because it looks cool. And a disproportionate amount of money ends up funding the NGO with very little trickling down helping solve the problem. So I think you have really great ideas, but it's how do we institutionalize it over time? I'm sorry, I'm rambling.
No, but this is important.
Rather than just, because I think it's a far better model. And it's one until I saw your presentation to the Presbytery that I didn't realize, oh, guilty. But I think there's an opportunity to engage in a post-mission discussion that is as powerful as the mission itself.
And, Bob, you've got a great point. You know what happens? We talked to, the first survey we did, 660 Presbyterian mission leaders, lay, and some ordained, but mostly lay people. We asked, do you evaluate the work that you do, globally or locally? 72% said, never. They don't evaluate the work wait, okay, you're putting this much money, this much change in people's lives, and you're not evaluating the impact? You're not asking people a question of, how did this work? How did this go for you? Are you glad what happened to your family, your kids? Whoa, what's that about? We don't think about that very often, in fact, because we're so focused on that felt good. I liked putting the money, I liked being able to give, and they honored us at the end of the program, and they gave us a banner or some artifact from their community, and we felt
One of
good.
our traditions after a mission trip is the youth sort of report out to the congregation what they learned. And oftentimes it's very interesting because it rarely is in carpentry skills or anything like that. It's cut twice and measure once.
Right.
But it's pretty clear that they get it. And kind of the challenge that we have is how to make sure that's not a one and done.
Right.
How
Beautiful.
How do we convince them that this is part of your calling, rather than you just cracked the light. And how do you convince them that they want to open the curtain?
Yeah, beautiful. And I think what turned Bala and me towards some of this thinking about mission was both of us had the experience of career missionaries consistently, when you go to their retirement parties, they say the same thing. All that I did pales in comparison of all that I received.
We haven't talked about that one yet.
Yeah.
But in the community, when we're entering that, and that I saw liminal space up there.
Yeah.
Entering that liminal space, it's not about the answers that I have for someone else's problem. It's about sitting around the table together and my learning from them how their culture and tradition and history, because their culture is much older than my culture is. How we look at that together and how their problem-solving skills come to the table and instruct me.
Right. In ways different from mine, perhaps.
Yes.
Yeah. And that brings in then, it's a much more sustainable model that we're building together, because it builds on their wisdom and their experiences and their ways of being in the world, which matters deeply. Yeah, beautiful. So, yeah, please.
I was going to say, I was a special term missionary in Egypt, 1961 to 1965.
And I met you
And I met you.
at, was it Dormont, Prez? Where? I can't remember the church.
I remember meeting you
Yes,
somewhere.
yeah.
But
I think Eunice Nasri got us together.
Oh, that was it.
I think so.
I stayed an extra year because there wasn't someone to take my place, and I'm a musician. The school was celebrating its 100th anniversary, and there wasn't going to be a music teacher there. My family had no clue as to why I was doing this. I mean, they naturally. But when I would come home and I'd go to different things and people would ask me about things, actually, Egyptian girls who don't know English very well but then they graduate from our English-speaking school, and they're fabulous. But I remember the girls and their personalities. I don't remember what I did necessarily.
there's a whole cloud of witnesses around you. A lot of folks who've experienced this in mission, yeah.
There was someone from special termer from that group who went on 2 special terms to Egypt, and then she came back to Pittsburgh. And she died last year, and a whole group of us ended up going to I want to call it the party after the funeral, because it's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
Now, there were a lot of people she knew from jobs all around here and everything.
Sure.
But the group of us that were all together, we just had a whale of a good time.
I bet. Well, because you'd all experienced that crossing over place together. My prayer for this congregation, and this is my first time to Community Presbyterian Church, but stepping in for worship, joining you for worship today, to get a sense of the energy, the excitement of 140 kids here who maybe we haven't seen ever or before or in a while, the possibilities that you have to go deeper in mission locally and globally are pretty exciting to me. So I'm grateful for the chance to think with you about ways that you all can engage more deeply with the superpowers that you have. So thanks for your time. Appreciate the time. Yeah. Thank you, Steve. This was great.
You'll have to come back. You can invite them back.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Yes, yeah, my pleasure. Great to be with you all.